So some background information on the costing. The ILO has a long experience on working on actuarial relations of social security schemes. And there is the ILO Facts, the branch at headquarters that have been developing models and providing assistance to many countries. And we actually have one here, Charles Crevier, who used to work in that unit for a couple of years. So, but initially the models were mainly focused on specific schemes. Then during the 90s there was a push to develop more comprehensive models. So we had the social budget model that some of you may be familiar with, was developed mainly to provide assistance to transition countries where kind of a more comprehensive approach was needed. But the ILO, the social budget model is quite a complex model, and it's quite tedious also to complete. But it aims at including all kinds of social expenditure in the country. The data requirements are also comprehensive, so it's quite a long exercise. And I would say that's the main constraint. So in the last years, after the launch of the Social Protection Floor initiative, so there was a need for something a bit more simple to use and rapid, and that's where the rapid assessment protocol was developed, and it is pretty much based on the same concept. So we have a kind of a framework that includes the demography and the economy, and so well, we come back to that later. So maybe I'll just show the model structure. You have seen this before in Valerie's presentation. So in dark blue, we can you can see the model framework. So this includes the population demographic framework. Then we have the labor market, labor force, or economically active population, and we have employment. And then we have macroeconomic variables, the GDP, we have the wages, national average wage, we have inflation rates, and so on. And we have the general government operations model, which looks at revenues, government revenues and expenditures. Then in green we have the benefits model that draw on the different parameters from the framework. And you will see that in practice in Cinta's worksheets. And a summary where we can add up all the different scenarios. Now here you can see a little bit more detail, and that's maybe the most tricky part of the modeling is how to match the labor supply and labor demand, also with the economic growth and productivity or output per worker, productivity growth rates. But I don't want to go too much into detail, so maybe let me move to this sheet here. So the RUP is basically, it's an Excel sheet, an Excel file, and there's different sheets. Yeah? And here you can see the different sheets. So we have in blue, this is the sheets we need to complete first. So we have a sheet for the population. And then we have the activity rates, which is basically the labor force or labor market participation rates. And it's a matrix. It's by age and it's by gender, so male, female. And this allows us to link the population to the labor force, or the economically active population. And it's all by single age and by male, female, or can be by age group, depending on the data available. Then we have a sheet with the economic variables. We have GDP in there. We have national average wage. We have the employment. And we have a sheet for the government revenues and expenditures. Now, this one says SQ, that means status quo. So here we do not take into account any expenditure or fiscal expenditure under the programs we are costing. So this is basically without the scenarios we are considering. Now I think there's another sheet where actually we look at the public fiscal revenues when we include certain our scenarios. Then in green we have our benefit sheets, and I have included 5 here, but it can be more, it can be less. And in every benefit, for every benefit, we can have different scenarios. And the last sheet is basically a summary. So a few words about the data requirements. So this is mainly for the blue sheets. The population, we need a projection. Then we have the labor force by age and by sex. Labor force by economic sector, if the data is available. So we can distinguish between the primary sector, secondary sector, and tertiary sector, so the service sector. The national average wage, we have the poverty line. This is quite important. I mean, this, if it's available, if this is the benchmark for setting our benefits. It's not always the most appropriate, but in many countries, especially developing countries, it's an important benchmark. Then we have the CPI, or the Consumer Price Inflation Index, and the annual increase. The GDP, we have real GDP and the nominal GDP that we get through the GDP deflator. And then the fiscal picture, so government revenues and expenditures. Now, depending on the scenarios we consider, there is other variables like the poverty headcount rates, if we look at like targeted benefits for the poor. Fertility rates, if we are looking at maternity benefits, for example. And then other costs, like if we look at in-kind benefits, for example, healthcare, then we need the per capita cost. Yeah, just for illustration, I would like to show some of the results we had in Cambodia with the costing. So here in this table, you can see all the scenarios we selected. And it was selected based on the National Social Protection Strategy that was already mentioned this morning. So there is kind of a policy, let's say an overall strategy that's available in Cambodia. And this was launched recently by the Prime Minister. And it has 5 different objectives, yeah? And so under each of the objectives we selected some scenarios for the costing. Now I would like to add that this is not final, yeah? It's a draft and it's still being commented on, yeah? So the first 2 relate to cash transfers for the poor. Then we have 3 to 5 relates to maternity and children. 6, 7 relates to public works programs. Then we have number 8 is the extension of equity funds for healthcare for the poor. And then we have the social pensions, 9 to 11. And the last one is social pensions for the disabled. Now you can see some of the benefits. We have, like, for example, some of the scenarios, like 3. We have 3 and 3U. So where we distinguish between the targeted scenario and the universal scenario. So 3, for example, it's only for the poor. And in Cambodia, there is a targeting mechanism, it's already in place. So this facilitates the implementation of targeted programs. And it's called ID Poor in Thailand. In Cambodia. And the coverage is almost complete, yeah? So the identification of poor in rural districts is almost complete in Cambodia. So now let's have a look at the cost. Here we have options 1 and 2. So this is the cash transfers for the poor. The first one is only for the poorest of the poor, so what we call extreme poor. And the second one is for all the poor. And we can see that the cost is quite high, yeah? Especially in the base year, first year, 2012. Yeah, for option 2, which is basically the cost of closing the poverty gap in Cambodia, is 4.5% of GDP. That's quite substantial. But we can also see that the trend is really decreasing fast. Now I have to say this is also related to the assumptions in the model. Yeah? We have assumed quite a high GDP growth rate, and then there is a trend that the poverty rate is decreasing fast. Yeah? So we have extrapolated that trend, and this explains why the cost is decreasing over the projection period. And in the last year, 2020, we have only 0.7 and 1.5% of GDP. So here in this chart, you can see the other scenarios. First, the targeted ones. So targeting the poor. And we can see the cost is already much lower, because here we're talking about targeted benefits. And then the last sheet here is the universal benefits. Now, the highest cost is for the pensions. That's 11 euro. That's the universal age pensions at age 60 plus. in blue, tenure age 65 plus, universal pension, and 9U is universal pension at age 70 or over. So that's just for illustration. I have to say the results are indicative and preliminary. This is just it's meant to provide some policy options for discussions and to facilitate the policy dialogue. Now these scenarios can be refined later as required. But they also show that if our assumptions materialize, that we have a high GDP growth and a decrease in the poverty rates, that some of these options are affordable in the short to medium term. But I have to stress again the assumptions. We have assumed a sustained GDP growth and a rapid decline in the poverty headcount rate.